Okay, I'm going to call this um special open work session for August 1st, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. to order. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Study items 2.01, board governance goals.
Chris, can you give me access to share, please?
Sure. Before we get into this, I know that Brian's here. Katie, I know, is traveling. She's excused. Brian just showed up. So there we go.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Super excited to bring this item back. As a reminder, the board evaluated their governance, which is a part of MSIP 6 under the leadership standard. And from that particular evaluation, the board began the process for looking at where it wanted to identify goals. And so as a part of that goal development process, I thought it would be beneficial to do a brief overview of what SMART goals are and walk us through how SMART goals can be developed utilizing the areas on the survey for the board with some actionable items. So I won't read that to you in total, but basically what a SMART goal is a clear and detailed way to provide some type of structure for individuals to reach their goals. And those structures include some clear specific metrics, and those are found within the acronym for the SMART part of SMART goals. So here it kind of details out what the SMART goals acronym means. And the S for purposes of our conversation really is identifying what we're trying to achieve in that particular goal and making sure that it's clear in the wording for individuals who are actually seeing it. So is it specific to the needs or the data that you're looking at? The M is really for measurable. So whatever goal you write, it has to include some form of a data point, unless it's a process goal, so that individuals can actually measure the progress that's being made from the start to the conclusion. The A is for either achievable or actionable. So we'll talk a little bit about how do you identify the actions that are needed as a means to attain the SMART goal that has actually been developed. The R is for relevance. Does it align with your overall responsibilities as a board? If you're a classroom teacher, it would be more or less what you're doing in the classroom. And then the T stands for time bound. Is it locked in? And do you know the end point by which you want to actually achieve that goal? So when we get to the point about executing SMART goals, it's critical to think about after you develop the SMART goal, what needs to happen. So for the board, in this particular case, the SMART goals you would develop, of course, will be shared amongst the board. Also, our stakeholder groups, whether that's community, families, teachers, and I would even say students, as we have student reps on the board. But the key piece is that regular monitoring of that particular goal. And as that goal is actually being monitored, giving updates throughout and then making adjustments throughout. So if there's something that is actually identified as an action that's to help achieve the SMART goal, if it's something that is found by the board that isn't working, you would stop and actually identify another action. And then the third piece of executing a SMART goal is really rooted in evaluating the achievements. So once we get to that point, if the SMART goal concludes, let's just say in May, did we reach that SMART goal? And if we did, let's celebrate. But if we didn't, or if we did and we recognize that we need to make adjustments, so as we make additional SMART goals, we would make those adjustments for that too. So there are a lot of benefits for SMART goals, and we use them regularly with classroom teachers and at the district level. But as we think about the connection to our strategic plan and the goals and the priority areas that are identified there, you have to have a SMART goal to measure what that looks like. So if we're talking about a SMART goal for our priority area for our students, which is the academic achievement piece, you would actually have something written that either is measuring proficiency of students or reading levels of students or a number of things based on what's outlined in the strategic plan. But it really is intended to keep us focused on the things that have been identified. In this case, it is a piece to hold the board accountable, meaning the board holding each other accountable for whatever goals that are actually established, and ensuring that whatever actions have been outlined are actually completed by the board. And my role in that would be to help facilitate or identify resources or support for the actions that you're looking for. Again, it provides a sense of direction. It helps to monitor progress. But I think the key thing is, the hope is that because of the SMART goal that's been established and the actions that have been identified, that we would see change in practice or see improvement in the areas that we are actually focusing in on. And in this case, is to better govern. So just showing back for the community and also the board, the initial board self-evaluation results. And just wanted to open it up. I know Katie sent in some thoughts around areas that were of interest, but just wanted to open it up for initial thoughts or things that you were thinking about as you've had a chance to kind of delve deeply into the results from your evaluation for the governance survey. Is there anything that stands out?
Well, I guess we could start with noting the two areas that Katie wanted us to consider for discussion, which were conflict management and fiduciary responsibility. It seems like the 4 orange highlighted ones would be where we would want to focus, since that seems to be the lowest scores we gave ourselves. So, but I don't know if other people had thoughts, or if there were any in those that weren't in those 4 that they prefer to focus on.
I mean, personally, I feel like the conflict management one is, I wouldn't want to necessarily focus all of my attention on that, because I do think that Katie made a good point about only picking like 1 or 2. For me, I feel like the most important ones would be the financial or the fiduciary responsibility financially, and monitoring the strategic plan, because I feel like if we could break that down, that's really how we can sort of evaluate how the programs are going. I don't know if we want to pick one particular aspect of the strategic plan, or if we want to maybe just talk about like making sure that the strategic plan is clear and understandable to the community. But that would kind of be my preference.
Those were the 2 I had too, Josh, were the 2 that I would prefer to focus on, but
I'm good with those two.
Can I ask a follow-up question around the strategic plan, and also thinking about what that means for the board from a governance level? More or less thinking how we report out at those varying points of where we are from a metric standpoint. So like, as we think about the strategic plan and we talk about for our students, and it's the academic achievement piece, we'll develop a SMART goal for that. Is it that the board is seeking to have the regular updates on the strategic plan to come forward at those varying metric points when the data points come in?
Oh, well, I think that in my mind, and other people might have a different view of this, but what I would like to see is for us to make it more clear exactly how the strategic plan impacts the community and the students. So not necessarily like what's being done, but how what's being done is, reflective of, where we want to be. So, yeah, obviously, the metrics are important, but it's also important for everybody to understand, like, okay, what does this really mean? Like, what is actually going on? That
And,
sort of.
and Josh, I personally, as someone who's new and didn't participate in that process, I would find it helpful to have a work session with the group where we sort of walk through it and we can maybe, ask some of those questions like, what were you thinking about here? What, you know what I'm saying? And then focus in on
Yeah.
understanding so that we can understand as a team, like, this is what we need to do to make sure that we are doing our role in making sure that strategic plan is in place. That's sort of how that to me was like sort of the starting point, and then we would
Yeah.
work through more detailed goals through that. But
Right. And again, like, I mean, I think that just, kind of making sure that all the pieces fit together, like, so we can explain how everything is kind of working together. That's really sort of how I see that.
So I wrote down in my notes that there is an appetite for the board to go through a work session to have a deeper understanding of the plan. And I did actually pull up the question that was associated with the strategic plan, which is kind of rooted in my follow-up question, which was the board holds administration accountable for implementing the strategic plan. And so if we're talking about an accountability piece, I do agree, Jenny and Josh, that additional conversation just showed the link between the priority areas and any SMART goals that are developed once the DESI data is released. So that's why I was asking if we're talking about more of communicating to the board so that the board can see how we're progressing with the implementation from an accountability standpoint. So I'm hearing two things. One, a work session potentially to unpack and understand and see the connection with the plan. And then if we're looking at the question associated with the strategic plan, it appears that it's asking the board or trying to put something in place so that the board is holding administration accountable for its implementation.
And I think too, Dr. Jameson, I don't know exactly how this ties in, but just kind of spitballing and thinking about like the committees, the data that's gathered through like when they meet and kind of their brainstorming with the community members and through all the stakeholders, like getting their input to kind of help guide some of those SMART goals that we develop, to kind of get everybody's, and then also it'll kind of help them to some degree, and myself included, to kind of understand the goal, how it's tied to the strategic plan through those committees as well.
So also just the added piece would be from an accountability standpoint, using the strategic planning committee. So that would be one of the actions once the goals are identified or the areas, using the strategic planning committees as an accountability piece too.
yeah, I guess the way I look at it is that, a strategic plan is sort of like a living thing that you're kind of constantly reviewing and updating. So I think by sitting down and sort of reevaluating it after 1 year and saying, okay, well, do we need to make a little more specific here? Or do we need to shift a little here? And then how do we tie that into our committees that we're like, Christy, that's a great point. Like how, if we're going to have the committees, like how are we tying that into, and we're participating into our, role in how the strategic plan plays out. So that's a good point, Christy. I like that.
And that's actually how those committees will be set up. So once DESI releases data and it's not embargoed, be some of the conversation. So what will happen, members of cabinet were kind of instructed to identify their actions for this year, which kind of link to the priority areas. And then again, once the data is released, we'll begin to have some conversation around those pieces as well. Other thoughts?
Yeah, Trent, Brian, or Linda, you guys have thoughts?
Yeah, I also fiduciary responsibility was one of mine, and I was going back and forth between conflict management and roles, because I know that can be complicated if you really take a minute to understand your role as a school board member and understanding DESE and everything, the Missouri School Board Association. So to really, what can we do to really understand our roles? I know with us, me going to the conference kind of helped me understand a lot of things, my responsibilities. So what else is out there besides, on onboarding with the school district? Um, you know, had an opportunity to sit with Chris to understand the finance. What is it to help us better understand our roles in order to understand a strategic plan? Like you said, Jenny, you're new, you weren't part of it. Even me being new, sitting there, I had questions and thoughts and like, okay, what do you mean by that? So I think as we are growing and developing and understand our role, all of that's going to come naturally. Um, with everything, especially that's highlighted in orange, it's gonna save on some of that conflict, management, and just understand the strategic plan. And we can be able to, as we even on committees that we're on, understand what our role is, even being liaison at the schools. First, we got to understand what is expected from us, which we know when we signed up, what it means to be on the school board, the do's and don'ts, and everything else. But do you truly understand to where you can be an effective board member?
I agree with you, Linda, and going back to what you just said about like being the liaisons for the schools, I wonder too if, this might be a little too concrete, I'm a little bit, I guess, of a concrete thinker, but like even having written, roles, like what, I mean, where it explicitly states like this is, when you're a school liaison, this is like your role as a school liaison, this is the definition of what that position is, so I know to some degree we talk about governance and things like that, but just where it's more explicitly stated for some of those committee roles and just exactly what you're doing there and like what your role is and what your the expectations of you are, in that position.
So that was a great example, Christy. So once the liaison roles were solidified, typically what happens is that I email that out and say, here's what this looks like. Here's what that relationship should look like. Here's what you can discuss and, invitations to events and things like that. And I wrote down like, what's the expectation for the board and the board committees. And I actually just had this conversation with one of my direct reports because I had to remind them that the strategic plan committee is actually a board committee and their role is to liaise and kind of plan their work together as they are the leader of their, what we call our management oversight team. And so those teams are working and looking at the action steps that they've identified this year to work on. So for example, one of the ones that Dr. Ambrose Phillips is focusing on this year is looking at the evaluations for certified staff and also support staff. And then I'll be leading the work with central office staff because the evaluation tools haven't been updated probably since 15, 20 years ago. So they need to be revisited, but that committee would do the work and then some of the work that she's doing to kind of feed into. But recognizing that their role is to actually plan those meetings with the board member who's actually the committee lead, because it is the board's committee. So I do think that that might be helpful for that. I do have just a thought. So typically when you are talking about developing SMART goals, you want to make sure that you do the ones that you do identify well. So typically you only identify 2 to 3 to focus on. So, for me, I think as we think about what's there's plenty. We will have a lot of time because depending on when these SMART goals are written for the areas, once something is completed, we can then add another one. So what should happen across the year, depending on what we think as far as like the time frame, and we'll kind of walk through some of that. If we think understanding roles, and this is just an example, will take us 2 months and we identify somebody, say from MSBA, to come in to further kind of unpack that for the board, and then we identify how we're going to actually measure that, then that may not necessarily take 3 months. Now, the fiduciary responsibility and the strategic plan one may take a little bit long because those are heavier lifts, but you are able to actually navigate between them. But I would say Typically, you don't want to do more than 2 to 3, and I would say 2 starting off would be manageable, but you could do 3. It's based on what the board wants to focus on this go round.
Brian and Trent, did you guys have anything to offer on the strategic plan ones?
At least for me, I have not reviewed the strategic plan for about a year now, but at least in total. As I remember it, I found that there were a lot of goals. And I was most concerned about how to measure them. So I am interested in developing goals that show some milestones and show how we can measure progress against that goal.
So Trent, I think we talked a little bit about this. So the strategic plan wouldn't necessarily have those measurable objectives in. So what you see there are goal areas, and that's typically how the department is leading that. So the metrics wouldn't necessarily be in the strategic plan. Those are the goals and the action steps that we're looking at. And the strategic plan does have milestones in it. And so like year 1, year 2, and then we update that with the new assembly, we'll be able to have some better developed, I guess, a data dashboard to be able to do that. And so while we're working to get that off the ground, but that's part of the work that we'll do. So we do establish those objectives to go along with the goals that we have. It has not happened yet because the data has not yet been lifted from being embargoed. So we have an idea of where we are, but and they're still making changes. Like today, I think Rachel got an update on the item, and it actually was better than what we initially anticipated. So as they continue to kind of work through, by the time we have our first set of strategic plan committees, the data should be ready for release, and then that information will come forward because that's the conduit for that. So that will be the work that happens in that strategic plan committee. And so each person, like for example, the For Our People one, we did have an objective around decreasing the number of staff that we lost, year after year. So last year we lost 21 teachers, and this year was 12. So, based on the goal that Dr. Ambrose Phillips created, we actually met that. And so I think with Jenny and Josh, when we had our agenda review, I talked about the updates on the goals that we actually were tracking and sharing the information about where we landed with those. So that'll come forward once the state kind of releases data and we're able to talk about that.
I guess I'm maybe I'm a little confused because I thought it may be so what Trent has suggested, and I know that it's not necessarily in the strategic plan, but this is kind of an example of what I would want as a goal, is to take that data, apply it to the strategic plan, and say, this is why for our students or whatever is working because of X, Y, and Z, so that we can see what's going on. And I don't think that it's necessarily like when I say strategic plan, what I mean is I want to look at that document and then draw the other stuff into it to say, like, this is how it is impacts. Like, this is how the strategic plan is working. Does that make sense?
Well, I think I understand what you're saying, but that, and like in the operational world, that's not how it works. So but I get what you're saying. So the way that it works is you develop your strategic plan, and the things that you identify as goals and action steps should feed into the data. So it's kind of like a if-then. If we implement project-based learning, then we'll see increases in student outcomes. So
but I mean, okay. I guess what and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but again, I don't understand why we as a board can't say our goal is to show what y'all have done and how that has impacted the strategic plan, because we're not dictating how you know what I'm saying? Like, you were on the ground floor doing whatever is being done to make sure that, the curriculum is being implemented and all that stuff. All I'm interested in is, okay, show me what that looks like. Like, just show me where in the strategic plan that is, how is that impacting that?
And I think
Does that make
that's,
sense?
yeah, and then that's how we then can say, well,
But
this strategic plan is
I
working.
know that you're shaking your head. I'm not trying to be confrontational, but I just don't. I guess I'm just at a loss as to why that is something that does. It's just not helpful, or
Oh, I'm saying that what you're asking is not an unrealistic ask. I'm saying that's not how it works. So if the board wants to see, for example, some of the items in there are what's called process items, right? So they wouldn't necessarily yield a quantitative result. So for example, if Dr. McGee is saying we need to define what grit means, that's an action, and then we would have something that would show that he's done that. Or if he said that he's adopting a resource, you would have evidence of that, but right? So it's not necessarily a crosswalk. The thing that's the metric, so there are process data points that you will see, which are like artifacts that will show you that that's happening. But what you're asking, which is what I'm trying to kind of explain, is that you want to know how are the things that are included in the strategic plan impacting student outcomes. And so typically the way that that works is once you see the data that's attached to that, the board has not seen that yet because the data is embargoed. So you would see that crosswalk when the update is given, but it's not the other way around. So that's why I was saying, like, I get what you're saying. And if you give me an opportunity, once the data is an embargo, to show you what that crosswalk looks like, it will become clear. But I think because we don't have any data at this point to show whether or not what's in the plan and whether or not it's working. But some of those things won't necessarily be, it won't be a data point. It will be an artifact, a process that actually come forward. So for example, if we're talking about staff retention, that's easy. How many people did you lose before? What was your goal? What things did you put in place? What worked, what didn't? And that's the piece when I said once the data is released, you will get an update and you will hear members of the team talk about those adjustments that they plan to make, because some things they might have tried may not necessarily have movement. So to Jenny's point, it is a living, breathing document. And so that's why we're having conversations around adjustments and things that need to happen. So
right. But I guess what I'm saying is, if you use staff retention as an example, you just said that you can look at numbers, but you can also look at, this is what we did, this is what worked, and this is what didn't work. That's kind of what I'm talking about for everything else.
yes,
Like,
but they're
I
not.
have an example here. Goal 1.2.2, create a personalized competency-based system of learning and assessment for all students. It's a 5-year plan, okay? That's a very lofty goal, difficult to do, even to achieve in 5 years. I'd like to see some sort of milestones about how you're going to implement that. Where do you start, intermediates, and where do you end up to get that all the way through K through 12? I mean, that's a very large goal. And I don't really know how many of those goals we can actually reasonably achieve in a 5-year period. So that's why I say I feel like there are too many goals.
So
which there very well might be, but I guess and I know that this is, again, not even like taking data into consideration. What I'm just saying is that the data is going to be there when we need the data to assess the programs, right? But I'm saying, what I'm more interested in is what also goes along with the data, because they'll be like, okay, this is what we're doing, this is how we scored in the map test. But I think that I'm also interested in, okay, well, is there any idea why we did that?
I mean, for this particular one, competency-based system of learning, what is the learning outcome for that? Why are we moving towards personalized competency based. And if we do it, what are we going to measure that's coming through at the end in terms of the outcome of that change in the way that we deal with students? I think that's what you're talking about, Josh, is that there's sort of three components to this. There's the goal, there's the what you're going to do, and then there's the what is the impact on the students. That's what we really need to understand.
So we can,
And
I think
again,
that if we're
if you
going to do
change,
that,
if you change too many variables at once, you can't measure which one had which impact. So
well, and also
you
too,
really
I mean,
need to narrow your focus in order to get something that's actually going to be measurable and workable and understand how it's going to move things forward.
So yeah, so I think that if we can focus on like one or two areas, like I'm not saying that we need like I just want to know what's going on, I guess is my point. And
again, like I hear you, and so you're thinking that all of those are being done in 1 year. I'm asking you to please
no.
to listen. The team identifies each year those things. So for example, your question about competency-based education, that Dr. McGee has already completed parts of that. So applying for the grant, the $400,000, being able to provide professional development. The professional development then helps members of our team and also including teacher leaders. So I'm asking you to be patient because you will see all of that. So for those friends who are new to the board, we give those updates and you will see those things that are coming through the committee to see that they have actually been done. And then from the output standpoint, we not only look at MAP and ELC data, we look at local assessments that are through NWEA and also through STAR. So I hear you, and I'm just trying to say that I like the idea of having a work session and being able to lay that out, because to Trent's point, he said he hasn't looked at the plan in a year, nor was he a part of the development of the plan or what we've been doing prior to. So I'm just asking, like, it would be
well, we're not making any decisions tonight. I mean, we're just kind of identifying.
This is an adopted plan.
Yeah. And can I make a suggestion? I think it seems like we all, or a majority of us, are in agreement with this being one of our goals. So maybe the next step is we have a work session where we've all looked at the most recent update of that. Then we can sort of focus in on that. But I think the second part is, I think what I'm hearing, it would be helpful for me, is that we as a board have a document of that plan that says, it doesn't just say completed, it says, well, this is how we completed it, right? And this is the outcome we saw. So like, I can say, oh, well, that particular point, it worked because we did this and this was the outcome. So, but we can talk about that more maybe when we have a work session after we're all up to speed and we can better identify like how we want to focus in. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. And I think for me, it would also be helpful before we get to that point that there is shared understanding around the difference between a strategic plan, what it looks like from a monitoring standpoint. Because when I look at the question for the strategic plan piece, it's how the board holds administration accountable. I think that really requires some additional conversation and some level setting so that everyone understands how the strategic plan works and what we are internally tracking. But the bigger question is, what of what we're internally tracking would the board need to know, and how does that fit in the governance level of this particular item? So I'm saying we need more time. So I hear you, I understand what the ask is, but I also think that there's some learning that needs to take place so that everyone understands how it actually works and what information is actually coming down. Because what I fear will happen, kind of similar to when we talked about my goals, is that there's a folder because we want to see those things happening. And now we're putting things in a folder for people to look at. And so I think if we spend some time actually looking at the strategic plan, leading you through what's there, what's actually being focused on year after year, how are we measuring whether or not those things have been completed, and then what are those quantitative metrics, I think that then will open the door for some of the questions that I'm hearing. But I'm asking, like, I'm fine with it being one of the board's goals, but I'm saying that I think that there is additional work that might be needed through a work session. So I just made a note to bring this through a work.
And Dr. Jameson, I don't think that we're I mean, what you're saying, and I don't think it's different than what, or at least I was asking. I mean, I'm not asking for us to have an immediate result or whatever. I just want to be walked through each step of the way. And it's not that I expect, oh, all of a sudden we know what the finite outcome is. I just want to know, I just want to be able to look at the document, and I want to be able to like look at those things that we were doing to say, okay, this is what we're doing, you
Well,
know?
and because when we talk about leveling up or whatever, ultimately it's our responsibility to monitor that plan and make sure it's being implemented. So I think it is
Yeah.
our role to, we're trying to say this is how we feel we need to be able to fulfill that role. And so I do think, and I know Brian, you haven't had a chance to speak, so you were raising your hand, so you go ahead.
Well, my comments now go back a few points ago, but just on maybe with this most recent thing, I don't want a work session reviewing the plan. I've read the plan. I've been to meetings about the plan. I know the plan, so I'm ready to. We're just about a year in. We need to start seeing things getting checked off and data points being added. But I want to go back to Christie's note earlier that this should happen within the committees, and then that's brought to the board. This is the board strategic plan. It's not the administration strategic plan. It's the board's plan. These are board committees to monitor the plan. So the board committee should be doing this legwork, gathering the data that it thinks its fellow board members need, and then brings those to the board. This should not be a burden on the administration. This is a board task. It's our job to collect the data. Yes, administrative team members will need to help provide the data that's requested, but really we need to devolve this down to those committees and not make a review of every point a whole board discussion. It should stay within these committees, and that's brought as a report to the board, and then questions can be asked of the relevant committee member. But that's my suggestion, that we go back to Christie's point earlier. And but I don't want a work session on the strategic plan again. I've read it multiple times. I've already been to many meetings about it. I hope we don't. Let's keep moving forward. Let's not go back to what was done.
Well, I don't think that, yeah, I mean, and again, as I view it, it's not necessarily a, hey, this is what the document is. This is a deeper look at what does this document mean and what are we doing to
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I was meaning by that, Brian. Was
away from it.
I want to see, these are the items, as we said year one, we were going to do these things. They're completed in this way. That all needs to be spelled out in a dashboard online for the public. And that's, so I think that was where Trent was going to. I heard you earlier, Josh, making a similar point, and I do want to affirm that. But that work should be done as a committee project, and then it's brought to the board to update the dashboard.
Well, let me say, so that not only the board and also community knows, that prior to my arrival, there were no strategic planning committees. So this is the first onset of this. And so that is how the committees are supposed to work. So that's why I was saying that we have not gotten into that, because we have not received any data. And the first meeting that we had last year for the committees were end of the year, because we were still trying to identify individuals to be a part of it. So I agree that the data, whatever data that wants to be requested by the board, is to be submitted by administration for that. And that's why I was saying that when talking to one of my direct reports, I said it is the board's committee. So I'm very much aware of that. And we do give an update of what we've completed and the data. What I'm saying is that information usually comes to the board, and it's not like this is what we've committed. Those things will still go through the committees, but we also, as a requirement from DESE, have to give an update on how we progressed on the goal. So it's a both and, it's not an either or. So I do hear you. Those things that you're asking are the work that we are already planning to do, and that work will come forward. And Brian, I wasn't, just to be clear, I wasn't saying go through and saying, let's read the strategic plan. I think to Josh's question, was about the crosswalk of what we were actually doing. So I'm just saying that it takes time to get there because right now we have no data because it's still embargoed. So even if we were having a September meeting, if the state doesn't unembargo the data, we wouldn't even be able to talk about that. The only thing we would be able to talk about is the items that we completed per year one. So I get it. So one of the goals is strategic plan for this year. And then I guess when I meet with Josh and Jenny, I flush out from my notes kind of to get better understanding for that.
And
I guess the job of the
own-
committee to name what is completed, what's yet to be completed, what data we're still waiting on. That just should be part of the regular
Well, that's what
report
I
of
was
that
gonna say,
committee.
Brian, I'm curious because I'm assuming, like most things, we're kind of triangulating data, right? To make sure that like it should be checks that it should align to some kind of conclusion. So along the way, I would just assume these committees are collecting data as we go. And some of it's gonna be formal data, some is gonna be more informal, but it should all be kind of triangulated. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of confused. So I understand like we're waiting for the formal scores to be unembargoed, but that I'm assuming that there's like other pieces of data that we can be including in the committee meetings and kind of.
Absolutely,
Well, I think
yeah.
that
The student score data is just for one section of this of the strategic plan. It
but
doesn't impact the 4 people or the building.
but I'm sorry.
Our WEA data. So I think, the assumption is that we're not looking at that data. So there are multiple. So for example, Jenny during the last board meeting had asked about having, because the buildings bring updates on their goals in September, and then they had an end of the year. And she said, I would like to have something slated for the middle of the year so we can see where they're progressing. So we identified a month for that, which would be February, based on when the local benchmark assessments are completed. So I want to continue to say, yes, Christy, what you're saying is true. We're not just looking at map data. And I say this repeatedly, map data, by the time we get it, is stale and old. So we usually use our local benchmark assessment, STAR and NWEA, to track, and that data will become available. But the cadence for that sometimes won't be available when those quarterly meetings are met. So the piece that I'm saying is, yes, we'll have all of that data. That data is readily available, and we look at that data internally, and that data will come forward. I was saying in regards to some of the other metrics that we look at, it is rooted in MSIP6 APR because that's how the district is accredited, but we also look at other pieces as well. So there's a bunch of data that will come forward. Whatever data the board is requesting in those committees will be provided. But I'm also saying that we give updates too, and we have given updates at the onset of the year of the things that have been completed. So it's not just one thing that we do. There are a multitude of ways that updates and accountability measures are given to the board. That's one of them. And the board committees are another. So I'm just saying, like, being open to the fact that you will see things come throughout the year. The same will be said for, if you look at the board agenda, the way that it sits now, because it's a part of MSIP6, we have an MSIP6 update that's included, and whatever information or data that we have or things that are actually completed will come forward. Now we can change that to a strategic plan update and make sure that we hit those pieces. So again, needing time to actually talk about how we want that to look, because you still can say strategic plan update and still fold in the things that are required by MSIP6, and then the board can identify what day. I'm saying we need time to actually unpack that. For me, I thought we were trying to identify which 2 areas or 3, whatever the board decides, and then thinking about how do we develop a SMART goal for that. So what I was going to recommend, once the board identifies the second area where a SMART goal would be, is to kind of think about either if the board is going to draft what that SMART goal will look like and bring it back, or if you would like for me to do that. So I did make an example of one just to kind of show, because figured this one wouldn't necessarily be selected, which was the roles and responsibilities. So I looked at the data that you had, and I was like, by April 2025, the MRH board's understanding and distinction of their roles and responsibilities from those of administration will increase to 85% rating on a role clarity survey conducted among board members. So basically, you would give the same questions that were asked in the board self-evaluation to determine if whatever the actions are. So if in this, I think to Linda's point where she was saying, just as this example, like, is there somebody who can come in and do some work? If an action in order to achieve that goal was to bring someone in from MSBA, that action would be listed in there. And then the hope is all of those actions. And when we get back to measure whether or not we've met that goal, that's what that would be. So whatever 2 areas or 3 that the board identifies will actually have to have a SMART goal, and then the board would actually identify and develop those actions. So, how you want me to support in that, I am open and available. So if you want me to like work on a draft, if you want me to think about what the board might need in order to achieve whatever goals, I can assist with that. How would you like for me to support with that?
I think the board should draft the goals because there are goals personally.
Yes.
I don't know if everyone else agrees with that.
I mean, I do, and I guess I don't need to be daft here, but I feel like there's a confusion between information and data. Like, hard data is not the only thing that I am necessarily interested in. I mean, for me, when I look at, like, if I was going to use how are we, like, what is the goal and how are we going to measure it? Okay, we would say for whatever committee, they're going to provide what they've done during X period of time, separate from what the result of that was, but just what they've done. You can measure, okay, they've done this, and this. And then you could then look at the data, whenever the data comes in, and say, okay, this helped, this didn't help, maybe it didn't help, or whatever, but at least everybody understands, okay, this is kind of how we got here to this data by taking these steps. And that's the kind of information that I think would be helpful for us, but maybe
and can I suggest maybe our goal for this particular thing is that our goal as a board is we as a board commit to, in the next year, having a check-in meeting on a strategic plan, or every certain periodic 4 times. I don't know, maybe after the committees meet, if they're meeting in a certain month, the next month, we have a check-in where we are holding ourselves accountable, since it's our job, and then evaluating. And then the assist is that we receive the information we need. If we didn't get it all from committee, we get it from elsewhere. I mean, does that make sense for this, of what our goal is? And
I think our goal is to have an understanding of what's going on. That's the goal.
But that's how we achieve it, right?
That's what I mean. And that's the step on how we do it.
4 times. That's how we hold. That's our measure, right? Of like,
right.
We are meeting, and then we are then evaluating that information and evaluating the plan to make sure that.
Okay. And let's say we do that. Yeah, but let's say we do that, and then we have now looked at the information, and we have, we now know what's going on. Then what? Like, what are we supposed to do at that point?
Well, I think that's when you make adjustments, right?
Yeah.
So I just, as thinking about a SMART goal, so meeting wouldn't necessarily be the SMART goal. Meeting would be the action. So,
yeah, that's what you meant. Yeah.
So just making sure, like, so.
Well, I mean, it's a process. We're establishing a process by which we are going to then also achieve the goal of understanding.
But that would be, when you're writing, it would be considered an action the board would take as a means to develop. And it's okay, like, however you need me to support with that. But I just want to make sure, like, as we're doing that and we talk about what the goal is, that there are clear actions, and that if the board's goal is to follow the process for developing SMART goals, that the actions would be a part of that. So I know when we talked about SMART goals, and I think everyone has received the training for that, but making sure that there is an understanding of like how those are actually developed and the actions that are identified to actually achieve the goal.
And I guess what I'm trying to figure out here, and again, just because this is relatively new to me, the ultimate goal, right, is to make sure that the district succeeds and that the kids are as well educated as they can possibly be. And everything else kind of flows through that. And I'm just trying to figure out, are SMART goals going to help us do that? Or is something more direct going to help us do that? Like, how do we do that? How do we do that?
Brian looks like he has something to say.
Well, first of all, I just want to, let me ask a backup question first. To whom are we submitting these SMART goals? Is there a state agency that's requesting these?
Well, they asked that the board actually evaluate. So I think I shared during the last board meeting, I have to submit artifacts showing that the board participates in professional development. I also have to submit artifacts that the board evaluated themselves. So we give award points for that.
So we did do that at our July meeting and our survey. That's it. I think to use the word triangulation from before, with Josh's point, Jenny's points here, and what you're saying, Dr. Jameson, I'm probably not interested in spending a lot of time developing SMART goals. I feel like we do have enough artifacts already to accomplish this DESE requirement. But I want to accomplish what Josh is saying, and we do that through the things that Jenny is suggesting, is that there's this irregular reporting mechanism that we build in. And frankly, I don't really much care whether it's a goal or it's a process. We're just going to do it. And we don't need to write it down. We can write it down. It doesn't matter.
Unless we do need to for whatever, the state requires.
Let's not get bogged down in these processes of writing goals that nobody is asking for. It's just we have enough artifacts already to document what we need to document for DESE, and now let's move on to actually doing these things. And I do think we've talked a lot about how that process should work, and I think a lot of us are just anxious to get going. So maybe that's the next step, is just let's get these committees scheduled and let's start going with the right people in evaluating whether or not the strategic plan is moving forward or not, and which areas need work and not, and that let's move forward there. So that would be my comment about this.
Strategic plan committees, the people who are responsible for those are working on reaching out to identify the dates. So I think, again, I want to continue to reiterate to caution that we are not, like, that is happening. Some of the folks who have signed up are not yet back. And so those dates and the individuals who are liaising to the board members for those committees will reach out to talk about how to actually schedule those meetings. My suggestion, which is what, I would appreciate feedback on, is more or less rooted in, we already have a monthly update around MSIP 6. And my ask was, do we want to change that to a strategic plan update? And once the board identifies what information it wants, then we use that as an additional mechanism. So I'm not refuting your ask. I am asking for guidance from the board regarding how would you like that to come? Because we do have to do a MSIP 6 update. It's required by the state. And there is a way for us to fold in and have the strategic plan update to also meet the requirements for the state. So if we want to change our monthly updates, and then the board has an opportunity, or when I meet with Josh and Jenny, we begin to think about what those things are, that's fantastic. I really just need to know what information you want, or I can look at the plan and tell you what we've been completing, but those pieces are already coming. So at the beginning of the year, the board will get an update on what was completed, what was accomplished, so all of those things are coming. So again, I caution, we're saying that we're not getting it. You just have not gotten it yet. You get it at the onset of the year when we have not only those pieces, and then you will see those trickled out throughout. So I would like the opportunity to be able to provide to the board what is upcoming, and if there are adjustments that need to be made, I can make those adjustments. But we have already plan out those parts for that. So there,
Okay, so just for a point of clarification, I don't believe we're saying that we're not getting information. The whole point of this discussion is to talk about how we want to receive information in the future. So there's no criticism of information that we received or not received or anything like that. And there's no impatience about receiving information in the future. So I don't want you to feel that pressure. Also, I'm a little confused because can't we do both, have an MSEP 6 as it applies to the strategic plan at the same time? Like that's kind of my point, is that all of this should fit together in my mind, right?
some of it does though, Josh, and that's why I was saying that I thought it would be beneficial for us to spend some time seeing the connect. So I think your initial ask about going through and seeing the connection with things, I think that's a great idea. And it allows us enough time to be able to have some initial conversation around those pieces. So that's why I was saying I love that idea, because I think it allows for more time for conversation. So Brian, to your point, I know that you've read the plan and I've seen you at meetings. I'm not saying let's read the plan again. I am asking for the opportunity for administration to show that crosswalk that you would not have seen. The only way you see that is when we give our updates at the onset of the year to talk about, here's what our data says, here are the goals, here's what we met, here's what we didn't. So I think that that would give us a more in-depth opportunity to do that. But Josh, you can do both. I was just saying, like, trying to also think about how do we use current systems that we have to be able to make clear to community, because to Jenny's point, the board's goal and role is to hold administration accountable for the implementation of the strategic plan, 100%. But in order to make that visible, some may not know that MSIP 6 is not the strategic plan. The strategic plan allows us to actually achieve some of the things that the state actually requires of us. So that's why I was saying, like, instead of having it to just be an MSIP 6 update, and once we do and have conversation around the crosswalk so that all of the board can see where the connections are, it would make much more sense to have it to be a strategic plan update monthly. And then once the board decides what data points they want to see monthly, that information can come as a part of the accountability. So I'm not questioning what data, I'm just saying that I would like to use current mechanisms. And once the board decides what those points are, whether it's quantitative data or an update of like what we've actually completed, that would create a natural space for us to do that. So that's kind of what I was.
When you say current mechanisms, what do you mean?
So right now we have on the board agenda a standing item that says MSIP 6 update. And I have that on there because
Oh, I see what you're saying.
it requires us to give the board frequent updates on progress that is being made on the items in MSIP 6. But what I was saying to Jenny's point is that the things in the strategic plan tie directly to that. And that's why I like the idea of actually having a work session to talk about the intersectionality of the two, and then to better understand some of the needs of the board. So I think right now, without having the full 7 here, and then also trying to further understand what specific data metrics you would like to see beyond the ones that we already track, and then also seeing when those points are. So there will be points 3 times in the year where you would see STAR and NWEA data. You only see MAP and EOC data once a year. Attendance data, while the state actually tabulates that, we track that internally, looking at proportional attendance. So I do think that a conversation is needed, because the level of depth and understanding around the metrics that are required in MSIP 6, what we're talking about, and the connection in the strategic plan, I think if we had that time, it will become clear when I say, well, it kind of works this way. Yes, the strategic plan committees can do these things, but there are some pieces that I think we need some shared understanding around. And I think that a work session will allow us to do that and be able to move forward in the direction that the board is asking. So I hear you. The ask is an easy ask. We do collect multiple forms of data, but to Christy's point, we collect internalizing and externalizing data, but that won't be the same as like suspension data or referral data. So I think having that time to be able to talk about, here are the metrics that we see that fit with these items. Here's what we're tracking. And if there is something else that the board is interested in, that would be helpful information for me to take back to the team.
So I had one thing for me. I have trouble. And I know we do get these regular updates, but they're part of a meeting where we have a lot of information come at us. So for me, something I was hoping you could consider was a way that we can centralize it. Like I see like online, I'm looking at I clicked on the link for the more detailed goals. Like it says we met one. Well, like if we could also have a box showing like how we met that goal, like what did we, I see like, because the goal doesn't necessarily tell you what you did to meet it. And so for me, having a centralized location where I can go back and look at the goal and say, okay, there's a box, like this is what we did. And maybe like it worked, it didn't work or whatever, or this is how we think we should adjust it. Just so I think that would be easier for myself in order to track this, just because we don't live with it every day. So when it comes at me piecemeal, it's hard for me to put it all together. I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but that's sort of, so that would be my ask.
That's what Assembly is for. So like trying to like update and launch that, you know, for that piece. And that's what I was talking about as far as like being able to see that. And the Assembly allows you to have a dashboard, but we have to work to build that. And so that's why I was saying, like, you know, stay tuned. We'll have a little bit more robust system. But I also want to say that the things that you're seeing where it says completed and not, those are considered action steps that will help us to kind of lead to that goal. So to Trent's point, when he was saying, well, we can't meet all of those goals. And that's why I was saying those aren't all goals. The goals that you see in the plan, when you click that link, the thing that Trent was talking about is that we can't do all of those in a year. And that's why I was saying that they are actually parsed out year by year. So I really do, I think I hear what you're saying. I think we will get that, Jenny, once Assembly is up and running. And we've seen like examples of that from other districts. But I do think that it is really important for us to spend a chunk of time, to your point, not during a regular board meeting, but a work session. And if it's better to be in person, so that we can kind of have some of this in-depth conversation, because I think we're using terms. The action steps are not the goals. Those are the steps that we're taking. And that's why I was kind of going through how we get to SMART goals and those actionable items. So I think if we are able to, once the Assembly is up and running for the strategic plan, you'll see that, and you'll be able to see those action steps in a different way, because it allows us to do that. But we were a little limited with what we have. And that's why we were super excited that the board approved Assembly, because we also can house committee stuff in there too. So I think, you know.
So is September, we don't have anything for September, right? For our work session, or do we have?
You and Katie were supposed to bring the first draft of the norms and protocols as well.
We can do that. We can, but I think, so would people be in agreement of setting this for our September work session? Does that make sense? Or yes, no?
It does, in the sense that, but the other thing that, the other important part of this is that, can you let us know, Dr. Jamison, what is a realistic expectation of time for us? Like if we say, hey, we want this information, like X, Y, and Z, can you let us know what that looks like in real time? Like what is like a reasonable expectation for when we can get that information? So we just know, like, okay, this is kind of what we should, you know, like, as you're saying, like I can't, you know, emphasize this enough. I am not trying to, I'm trying to alleviate the stress of gathering information for us. I just want it, but I want it in a realistic, you know, reasonable time. And if you can give us like what we can expect when, as we present goals to you, I think that would be helpful as well, so that, you know, it's not just that we're dictating, hey, we need this information. It's, you know what I mean?
So I would say that local assessment data is easier to give. And so, and the cadence that we use for that, just being very honest, I do like, say, for example, when the NWEA and the STAR data comes out, before we put that at a board meeting, I do like principals to be able to engage staff in that, so that they know what the data says before it's actually coming to the board. But usually the turnaround time, once the assessments are completed and any makeups that are actually done, that data is fairly easy. Attendance data is fairly easy. We don't necessarily look at ADA, we look at proportional attendance. And so that data we actually track currently monthly in our COA meeting. So Rachel gives updates to say, here's where we are, by building, and then we look at the district level. So it really depends on what data that's being requested. So for example, you wouldn't necessarily have any staff retention data once the year starts. So that data would actually come for the end of the year. So I think what I'm hearing you say, and one of the things I'm going to work on to kind of bring back is list all of the different forms of data that we look at and show like where those drop from a regular cadence. And then the board can decide when they would like those items to come forward. So for example, we don't just look at suspension and referral data. We also look at SRSS data to determine students who have internalized and externalized behavior. So when Christy was talking about triangulating data, you can't just look at the suspension and referral data without looking at whether or not the kid is internalizing or externalizing. So let me compile a list of all of the data and let you know where the natural cadence for that falls. And then the board can decide what of that data and when you would like that to come. The items around the informational items to, I think, I don't know if it was Trent or Brian, like some of those items, depending on where the leads for those teams are, I can't really justify when those things will be completed because they have the year and the scope of the year to do that. So for example, with Dr. Ambrose Phillips working on the evaluation tools, I could probably say I can give it to you a month, but she's working through them with other people. So that may take 3 months to complete. So I'd say, like, if you give me time to list all of those data points out and provide those to the board and show you when those points are, and then the board can say, here are the data points that we will want when. I think that would be probably a more helpful exercise versus the request coming in. So at least you know that here's when it's expected to be available, and then you can kind of tell me when you want it.
Well, I would like to just interrupt and say, Dr. Jameson, I think that's commendable. You would want to do that. That sounds like a lot of work, and it doesn't need to be done because that's a decision of each individual committee and each committee chair, the board member, to work with the staff liaison to figure that out on a committee by committee basis. I just think you're adding. I don't know, if I was you, I wouldn't want to add extra work like that onto your plate. I don't think the board needs that. Like I'm on the 4R resources committee. That's the area of the strategic plan I want to become more expert in as the months go on. And I want to request data related only to that. To get a list of when other data drops that's for our students or for our community or for our health, that doesn't really interest me because that's another board member's area of oversight. So I really would just say save yourself the time and not create this big chart and data list, and let that be a committee by committee decision. If on the committee for the 4R resources, Trent or I, and talking with Mr. Holzer or whoever else is on that committee, say we think we'd like to know this or that, and they say, oh, that data comes in January or March. Great, then we know it comes in January, March, but then we get that directly in that committee. Let's let the committees do this work and not have, I just think we could get in a situation where you're doing a lot of tasks that probably are not necessary the committees can handle on a case-by-case basis. I would stress that we devolve decision-making down to the committees.
So I'm not saying that I would do it. I'm saying that from the standpoint of, I know the members of my team. And so if when you may ask for something, at least the committee would know up front when those things would come. Like you can ask all of them. So I'm not saying that I'm going to go and sit and make a list and drop some data in. I want the board to know, because to Christy's question, she said, I know that this is not the only data. That's correct. But if you don't know as a board member what those metrics are for the variety of things in the plan, that's all I'm saying. So
yeah,
I want to you see
But
that.
the committees can sort that out
Well,
individually.
and I think to Brian's point, like, I think that would just flow naturally, right? So like, you all do what you have to do and present it, and then we will
Yeah.
understand, okay, this is the data you look at, rather than spending the time like laying it all out. Like, it should just come naturally, right?
It
So then when
should
we're
just come naturally.
receiving it, we then can pass it on. Because to Brian's point, like, that seems like a very large undertaking that, I mean, maybe if you want to do that, like, it will help staff to sort of determine, that's fine. But like, I don't think we need that list, because Brian, you made a good point that I didn't really think about. Like, we all sort of become an expert in our area. And then when we have those meetings where we're checking in, we are sharing our expertise, and then
That's
we
right.
can ask each other questions. And maybe another board member will say, oh, hey, for our resources, could you also think about asking for this? And then Brian and Trent would take
Yep.
that back.
Take
I
that
agree.
back.
I think if we're going to have them, we may as well use them to eliminate some of the burden on staff.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Let the board committees do the board's work and bring reports to the board. This is how a normal board would function that
Yeah.
has committees to
I mean,
research.
Josh,
research
does that get to
subjects.
what you were asking about, Josh? Because I didn't get.
I mean, I just want to make sure that, two things are accomplished, right? One, that we get the information that we need, but that we don't overtax the people doing it by not having a realistic expectation of when the information
Right.
is going to be received. And if
Right.
by
Agreed.
committee, they can tell us, hey, this is when this information is done, and we can say, all right, fine, that's when that's done, then I don't see an issue with it. But again, my goal is, or my concern is to make sure that we are not putting an unrealistic expectation on those people that are going to be providing the information. That's it.
Yeah, that's a committee by committee level decision, and balancing the requests with what's available. That'll be a committee by committee matter. We can't manage that for all of these subjects from the board level. That's why we have committees. The committees need to become expert in in these topics, and we need to trust one another on the board to do due diligence on behalf of the rest of the board.
So my suggestion is, we've been talking about this for a real long time. So I think we know what our next steps are. Like, we need to have a work session. If we can do that in September, that would be helpful, just to narrow in on our goals. And then we'll have our first committee meetings. At that September session, we should have an understanding of when committees would meet, I would think. So then we can pick a time to then meet again about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because we could go on, but I think we're just. I think
No,
we all
no,
know.
I think that's
we all
good.
know what we want. And
Right,
I think we
so,
still have one
yeah.
more subject to talk about too. So that's why I was, because I was interested in the fiduciary responsibility, but to me, this is a little bit simpler in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, my thought is in what we've already talked about, was creating a budget process. That was sort of what I was looking at, and how we as a board become more accountable and like to the community is perhaps in November or somewhere around there, having a work session with the community where, the administration can maybe give a brief overview of a budget and how it works. And then they can talk to us. We're all there. They can sit, they can ask us questions, share their thoughts. And I don't know, those were sort of my, the other thing for me on this to consider is that there's been a lot of talk, our budget, we have to do something, like, and if there's going to have to be a tax levy at some point, I also think a conversation that should be started with the community about what they think about how we're spending our money, if they were to approve a tax levy, what they would approve it to spend it on, and those kinds of things. So those were sort of my initial thoughts on that topic.
So I wrote down the budget process, which was one I think that Trent had asked about already. So Chris is already kind of thinking through what that looks like, and we talked about bringing that earlier. So that one is already on item that we're working through to bring forward. And I think, Jenny, we had already had down the budget work session 2. We just hadn't landed a date. So I'll put that on our check-in committee. And then we can have a conversation about, like, what does it look like? Because we currently have a a way to have those conversations through the community conversations. So we could potentially put some of these on those as topics. And if we need to use a larger space because more people are coming outside of Shafley, we can do that. So we currently have a way to have those community conversations. Board members have been coming. So I'll kind of work with Chris to get an idea of when that budget process will come to the board early enough so that we can begin to hash that out. And then Jenny and Josh, if we can maybe spend some time talking about when an ideal time would be for those conversations and
But leave that for our community board committee. Why don't we leave that to them to figure out again, rather than
Well, I think
falling on
that
your
the
shoulder.
issue is about us like just setting an agenda or setting a meeting or something like that. And that's fine. It's just
I think the
I
for
mean,
our community is more focused on the strategic plan aspects. Like this is different to me. I that's my
Yeah.
understanding. Is that yours, Josh? That was sort of my
the strategic.
yeah, but I mean, yeah,
For our community one is, if you go back and look at the items that are listed there, it's not necessarily that. I'm not saying it can't be. I was saying that we currently have structures in place. If the point is not to create extra work, we currently have conduits to have conversations. You just put a topic on there. I'm not saying that
okay.
needed. I'm saying,
yeah.
using
Using an existing community event that is on the calendar. I guess I want to make sure it's one that all the board members can come to if they want, because then it's a meeting. So like I think that's the distinction I was making, is that if it's a work session, it's already a scheduled meeting that we are planning for, so it may be easier, but either way is fine. But I think the format would look a little different than those community conversations, because to me it's more of like maybe you have some poster paper and people can write down things that they want to see us examine and have conversations with us.
So we could also talk about, and again, I think probably not a right now conversation. You have the board community meetings that take place twice a year. So I'm just saying, like, I don't know if this is the place right now to talk about that. And that's why I was saying, if I would love to have some dialogue around what we currently have in place, because we can use what we currently have to get to what the board is seeking. Because usually those meetings are to provide updates from the strategic plan, which is the data that's provided, and then those individuals. So I know that Trent has been one of those. It's set up many, just like you're saying. So there's chart.
Yeah, the round table. Yeah, using the round table. Yeah.
Get the feedback and the collection of. I think we have ways to get to what you're asking. I just think that not doing it here and maybe thinking a little bit intentionally about how we do that would be beneficial for us.
And I just wanted to hear, what other people thought about this particular fiduciary responsibility, what their thoughts are that they wanted to set as goals.
Aside from maybe having, I don't expect us to have a master class in accounting on it or anything like that, but just, maybe an explanation of what our limitations are. There was a good summary of the that stupid amendment. I forgot its name. The
Hancock
Amendment, Hague Amendment. Which one is it?
Hancock Amendment or the Chevron?
Yeah, the Hancock Amendment, right. There's a good summary of that online that kind of explains the history of it, what exactly we can do, what we can't do, any discussion that we're about to have about any type of revenue issue. I think that that's very important, that everybody understands exactly why we have to work within the parameters that we have. But other than that, I think it's just the same thing that Jenny sort of suggested, walking through the budgeting process, monitoring what's working, what's not working. I think to me, that seems like the easier part. It's the more, I guess, dramatic part, but for me, it's more tangible than the other things that we're doing.
Establishing a regular budget agenda calendar not piling it up at the end. And then looking at what are our needs for our district going forward, and how are we going to develop a plan to go out and have another tax levy, those sorts of things. Line those things up, have a plan in place. Those are the ones that I'm thinking of.
And I think too, for me, I think Katie had mentioned this in her note, just to bring her back in because she couldn't be here, but she had mentioned like maybe having some training around like how tax rates are set and bonds and how that stuff works, like for the board. That might be a nice, if there's a, Josh, or if you can refer, like send that link for that thing you found about the Hancock Amendment, like that would be helpful, I think. But the other thing I was interested in as we think about budgeting was, I think what a goal of this board and our district, I think, is how do we find ways to pay our teachers more and our staff more and our administrators more, everyone, right? Because we're low. And so coming up with some sort of plan of understanding where we want to get to, right? And what money we need to get there, I think would be a very helpful exercise if we in 5 years want to be at a certain level, like, what that sort of, I know there's a word for this, like for this type of plan you do, but I don't know what it's called, but.
Salary audit. Actually, Dr. Ambrose Phillips started that.
Okay.
Last year, and we look at that each year, and that's been the conversation that we've had. So we know who's at the top, and we know where we are, but we also know that it's not realistic that we're going to be where some of my colleagues are. So we talked about what's a good landing spot, but we also talked about, in addition to salary, what else in the benefits package is going to be beneficial for staff. So like we made adjustments prior to CBA through the Compensation Benefits Task Force to increase the tuition reimbursement amount. So it's not just salaries, it's the full benefits package, which sometimes. So we have some preliminary work on that I'm sure Dr. Ambrose Phillips will share in the committee, once they start up and running and the questions are coming. So I think a lot of what you're asking, we're already doing. So I do think that once the committees get up and running, I think the board will be able to see the work that's been done and what we've collected so far.
Well, that's great, because I think that really informs too a conversation around asking the community for money, because to me that's where the need arises. But so great.
Well, do we move to adjourn?
Sounds good to me. I get a motion?
Motion
So
to
moved.
adjourn.
Second.
All in
Second.
favor? Okay. Yeah, sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
Aye.
Who was
Thank you.
second?
Pick
I
one.
motioned,
group
Jenny
effort.
seconded.
Okay.
Sorry, Linda.
Take care, everyone. Have a good evening.
All
Thanks,
right.
Steve.
Bye.
Bye.
Guys.